Hey everyone, welcome back to the Diet Doc Life Mastery Podcast. I'm Joe Klemczewski, founder of the Diet Doc, here with our Wellness Director and Vice President, Dr. Kori Propst. Kori, people have been noticing a shift in your social media, and you're doing a lot of pinpoint discussion work on binge eating. I like it because no matter who I work with in the general population, in competitive physique sport, performance sport, there will always be a need for a clear, articulate, educated voice on these topics, because it goes from potentially, a nuisance to a full-on eating disorder for some people. So tell me why, first of all, you've been more interested in discussing this as a topic, and then I'm gonna definitely talk about some of my client struggles with you.
Sure. So, Joe, my interest in this has been long and drawn out. It's not like it's peaked right now, and although I am seeing a lot more people, based on the circumstances we're in currently, struggling with binge eating and emotional eating. But I personally and professionally really needed to drill down on how I thought I could best help people. And so that's why you've seen the shift and the targeted focus of late.
There's also been a lot of movement, I think, in the field, in diet culture, away from the hard, rigid dieting, which, we've been advocates against for 25 years. But even just you have to lose this amount of weight, and you got to really be hyper macro profile based and calorie based, all the way toward, you're hearing the words intuitive eating a lot, values based eating, that kind of thing. And do you think that's a good shift with people who struggle with compliance?
So first, let me address the word compliance. I think where we go wrong oftentimes as coaches is we are expecting compliance and we're expecting adherence. And when we move in that direction, Joe, what we do is we also remove an individual's autonomy, and we take away the trust that they may have had before they even got involved in diets and have been, impacted or influenced by diet culture. We take away what was really there when we were born. We weren't questioning how many calories we need to eat and when we need to eat and what we need to eat and why we need to eat it. And we weren't following plans. So yes, that sort of a movement, and it's been around for a while, Joe, but because of where we're at in health-wise and within the wellness sphere, and because we do see eating disorders and disordered eating and maladaptive eating rising, intuitive eating, body trust work, body autonomy work, moving away from very structured eating plans and diets is important, and is in many ways what I do in my work with individuals who are struggling with those things. What is typically happening and with an individual who is struggling with disordered eating is they're turning away from themselves. With someone who is binge eating, yes, it is often due, 45 to 55% of the time, it's often due to food restriction. And as you and I have talked about so often, the body is going to do what the body needs to do in order to survive. We can't prevent the biological mechanisms to prevent starvation and that promotion of hunger and that drive to eat and fuel ourselves. There's a lot of things we can do mentally and intellectually, but we can't prevent that biological drive. Otherwise, part of the healing and the recovery that comes from that is, yes, we have to learn how to eat adequately, but then there's the can I turn toward myself aspect of it. And this is more difficult. we're so used to following plans and protocols, it can feel really ambiguous and scary and cloudy, and it's not a step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4 process. This is we're feeling around in the dark here to get to know ourselves in a way that's been lost, and in a way that has oftentimes been stolen from a diet that has said, here's how you eat. Here's what you eat. Here's why you eat. Here's when you eat. Here's the plan. And it's very black and white about whether you're doing it right or wrong.
Well, I'm glad the last word that came out of my mouth was compliance, completely unplanned to trigger you into that discussion point, because it's funny to me that, or not funny, but it's ironic that diet culture in the general population lags behind substantially in what we're talking about in the back end of the industry. We're talking to researchers all the time, and we're discussing this kind of stuff in our own inner circles, because flexible dieting, something that we brought to the industry 25 years ago, is not even mainstream yet. And yet here, diet culture way back here in the research circles is now talking about, more intuitive eating. And so we're almost a generation ahead of where people are and what they're experiencing. And it's really funny to me that a lot of people never, ever get to the point where they realize it's more of a developmental process for each person individually. It's not that, society and research figured out this is how you should eat. We all have this journey with food and sustenance and health and fitness, that it just, you need that next step. No matter where society is and research is, you need the next step. And so I have this client who was really struggling. She has a great macronutrient plan. I'm looking at her food intake and her meals look great. And yet on a level of food that she should clearly be losing on, she's not losing. And then she even had a little bit of a gain. And so I know there are adherence issues. There are some things happening there. And, we get into these, little bites and tastes and nibbles. And I'm not going to tell my coach that I ate that, and we'll just see how it comes out in the wash of the week. So I said, how about we go back to kind of a basic meal plan? I'm going to get rid of some, like, you're eating this food and this food and this food, and they're all kind of indulgent, gray area foods. I'm like, we need to kind of get back to some easier to track, more accurate whole foods, things you can rely on. They'll reduce hunger. Would you be happy for me to help you build an exact meal plan we follow? And she's thrilled. She's like, oh man, that'd be amazing. I would love that kind of structure. So here's a person who needs to start with more structure.
Yeah.
Then we can add more flexibility. And then eventually, hopefully, we can add more intuitive dieting. But I think that's the big mistake we all make, is that as coaches, consultants, we still always have to deal with every single person where they are and think through their own understanding and experience with food in a very developmental process way.
I completely agree with you, Joe. It's, like I said, no matter where that person is, if they're trying to heal and recover from disordered eating, even with a meal plan, they're probably going to still feel, because the goal is, I'm not going to follow a meal plan for the rest of my life. I'm not going to need this, because I will have worked through this and understood how different foods affect my body, because I'm practicing listening and honoring what it's saying it feels good eating. Let me back up a little bit. Typically what we often see is someone who has been engaged in rigid dieting for a very long time. They have a lot of fear. They hear intuitive eating, and part of it is, it's going to cure me. On the other side of that is, if I let myself eat flexibly, I'm not going to be able to stop eating. I hear both of these things all the time. And initially, like, when they do start eating the foods that they haven't allowed themselves to eat for a very long time, there is that drive. There's this like, no, you need to keep going, keep eating this. Because underneath that is that thought from dieting that this will end you're at some point, you are never going to get this again. And maybe not never, but for a really, really, really long time. So it perpetuates that belief that, you know, you're never going to be able to stop. I have never met anyone, though, that has never stopped. But they have to loosen. We have to work with our clients to loosen the reins a bit so that it's not so fearful. And as they begin trusting themselves more, that too is when they're able to say, okay, I think I'm done. Like, but here's the caveat. When we do this sort of work, sometimes people gain a little bit of weight. Sometimes they do that. And that's the other fear from diet culture, is that if you gain weight, you're undisciplined, you're lazy, you're fat, and you're wrong. You're bad. And that's another belief. That's a whole other part of this, is getting at all of the beliefs that they've become attached to and have made part of their identity.
Absolutely. So here's where I think a lot of people could still have problems finding that balance. And that is, there is the Dr. Kori Propst, who is talking about all of this turning inward to yourself and being autonomous means maybe you're not tied to perfection. Maybe this is all more of a long game approach, and you don't have to be perfect every single week and see those numbers falling in line exactly how you think. But there's also the Dr. Kori Propst, who has earned 3 pro cards in 3 physique sports. And you're just a machine of will and discipline, unlike anything I've ever seen as a coach. I have 25 years of coaching experience. You were a client of mine. There is nobody who can perform like you in a mode of perfect execution. So there's 2 sides of Kori. There are 2 very distinct sides. And even in your career, there was a time when you were very performance oriented in that way. And now you're still performance oriented in ways that allows for greater expansion of your life. You're doing things in different ways. But we still end up coaching a lot of people who are going to watch this are competitors who say, okay, I get all that, and I know I need to add that in, but right now I got a contest and I've got to be perfect. I've got to win. And so let's talk about what, quote, perfect looks like when you have that performance goal, because I'm probably the softest coach in the world in terms of, I'm never going to berate somebody for doing something bad. If they have a bad week, I'm going to say, hey man, let's look at the silver linings here. Let's, you know, you're going to have some greater energy, and maybe that gave us a little bit of an unintended diet break, and, you know, let's get right back on track, but, you know, no harm, no foul. You know, I'm somebody who gives that kind of space. But at the end of the day, they also want somebody who's going to hold them accountable and help them win.
They want the results.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about those 2 sides of Dr. Kori Propst.
Well, there it is. We have to recognize that we have lots of different selves within us. So I think that people who are really going to struggle the most is when they just have one identity. This is who I am. And it's a very sort of closed mindset perspective where we want to be able to expand the vision a little bit. And part of what really helped me in doing this, because I have very different goals now than I did then, but I'm doing well in both areas. It's especially in times when, let's say I was dieting for a competition. And you know as well as I do that I had to get pretty low sometimes, and let's slap on like 2 sessions of exercise a day, for example, where I just was feeling just depleted, incredibly tired and fatigued and hungry a lot. And for us as athletes in situations like that, to be able to understand that it's temporary, and to have some perspective, and to use these times and these challenges as opportunities to understand our minds, is crucial. And this is a lot of what, like, I just started with a new client. He came to me with binge eating issues. He's a previous athlete, and like he almost played pro in a certain sport. I don't want to reveal too much, but now he lifts weights, he stays active, but he's really struggling with binge eating, and it happens mostly on the weekends. And right now what we're doing is working on noticing his thoughts, because with binge eating in particular, what happens is you have an urge, which is literally a thought. It's a thought. An urge is, you need to go eat that. You need to stop at the gas station. You need to go plan this binge. Oh, they're leaving. You're going to be home alone. You should, this could be a binge time. Those are all thoughts. They're not commands from above. It's not, there's no dictator telling you that you have to do that. It's just like a thought, like the bedspread is blue, or you know what, it's 9:38 a.m. Pacific time. We can learn to view the thoughts that we have and the urges just as neutral, as a thought like, my webcam is a Logitech. You know what I mean? So that's a significant piece of what allowed me to do what I did and stay very disciplined. So just words.
And you have to keep telling yourself that, because this doesn't just happen once and you're like, oh, I got that. That makes a lot of sense to me. This is like every
practice.
Every time those biological hunger cues come in, every time you feel weak and depleted, you got to say, okay, it's just a thought. I'm doing this on my own volition. I want to win. I want to do this. Yeah. I want to see what this process can yield for me. So there's a lot of self-communication. It's not just, oh, I can learn this one trick from Kori and then I'm good.
It's not that. I was uncomfortable a lot, and I still get uncomfortable a lot doing what I do now, which is mainly cycling. And there is suffering involved in cycling, just like there's suffering involved in preparing for a physique contest. But we can make that a lot worse by the story that we weave around the suffering or the discomfort. I can't do this. Oh my gosh, how much longer can I manage this? This is terrible. We build it up. We write this novel, this treatise around our inability and our just the pain that's there. And gosh, I looked at it like it with practice, Joe. Again, yes, it's all about the self-talk and the thoughts we want to have around it, because while our minds are going to make their own thoughts, thousands and thousands of them a day, we can also be very deliberate and conscious around the thoughts we're going to have and redirect our minds that way and have more of those and think more of those and have two ways that we are utilizing our bodies. Like when I'm on the bike and I am trudging up a very long hill. It's a steep hill. I could be like, oh, my legs are burning. Oh my gosh, they hurt so bad. Oh my gosh, they're getting heavier and heavier. I don't think I'm going to make it to the top. Or it's like grounding, centered. I'm going to count my pedal strokes. So it's this very deliberate redirect. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I can't focus on the pain and the counting at the same time. It's impossible. And the pain may like yank me right back, but then I can hop right back out and go back to the counting again. I mean, you said you had a post or a podcast a little while ago about Wim Hof and how he sits in ice water for however long. What's he doing in that time to manage the suffering?
So this is exactly what I wanted to get to, because I need to formally concede a point to you in a long running discussion that we've had, in that I've always, and you wouldn't disagree with this, but I've always talked about the interweave between the psychology of suffering, as you said, or discipline, and the physiological pressure, and how those go hand in hand. And so I want to take our listeners to the worst possible place, to the Wim Hof level of dieting. And I will start with this. So there is first of all, there is that interplay of biology and urge and hunger and starvation and hormonal just massive need to us ultimately still having the autonomy to make any decision we want. So I'm, like yourself, a pretty disciplined person, and I never have a struggle with control per se. I mean, especially in food, like I can have one beer, I can have 2 slices of pizza, I can count out exactly how many chips I'm going to have, put that in a bowl, and that's all I do. But there was a time in my first year or two competing as a pro where I felt such pressure, and I thought, wow, what have I gotten myself into? I do not belong here. I don't even know if physically I can do this. I certainly did not have the nutritional knowledge I have now. I was still in my 20s. And I got into a cycle for a season or two of binging that was just scary. And it was unstoppable in a matter of, I could be in a kitchen and you get that first little taste, like, okay, here are my macros. Here's my plan. I'm just going to have like one little taste of peanut butter. And then I mowed down like 2 cups of peanuts. Or, I mean, everybody who's binged, you know what this is like. You get out of control and you do things that you would never want anybody to see. Like I remember a couple times my wife just leaving the room. Like, I don't know what's happening, but I can't even be around this because I don't know what's going to happen next.
She didn't know you in that moment. She's like, who is this person?
I didn't know myself.
Yeah.
But then to perpetuate that cycle, then I would be at the gym the next day doing 4 hours of cardio.
Yes.
I would be, I'd be like, okay, shit, I just ate 1,500 calories that I didn't want, and now I got to make up for this because that contest date is on the calendar. I mean, dude, this happened to me once or twice in a couple contest runs where I felt that kind of psychological pressure. Then I would put that physiological just fuel on the fire, and it was a spiral I could not get out of. But had I had a Dr. Kori Propst telling me, hey, let's work on just that one thought. What's that tipping point thought? Maybe we can change one behavior today that doesn't allow every domino to fall. And I think that's the process a lot of people don't understand, because they see the all or none. They see, yeah, I can be amazing, I can be perfect for 6 weeks, and then I just totally lose my shit and I can't get back on track. So if you don't mind us closing with what is that real process like, and what is the dynamic between the physiology that you need to get control of with the psychology?
So let's start with the physiology. Just like with the psychology, recognizing that thoughts are words. There's streams of words. It's like, am I going to jump on that train? Am I going to jump on that thought train? I could jump on that one or that one. Or can I just let them go on by? Physiologically, again, we can build up, we can create, it's like we literally grab a notebook and we're like, I'm going to write a really terrible suffering story around what this experience is happening in my body right now. Hunger is literally a 6-letter word. Pain, a 4-letter word. There is some compartmentalization that goes on here. And I think for very high level athletes, that's exactly what we need to be doing. It's a complete reframe. Hunger, 6-letter word. Okay, that's what that's called in there, like that rumbling and that sense of emptiness. 6-letter word. Like, there's no meaning tied to 6-letter word like there is hunger or pain or emptiness. Recognizing that we have such strong attachments and images and emotions tied to words is incredibly important. But so let's say, we hear the thought, I'm so hungry. If we tune into our bodies, maybe there is grumbling. There's some sound going on. There's a sense of, it's definitely not fullness, like satisfaction. There's emptiness there. Tuning into the sensations of it instead of the thoughts around it can help us like disassociate from any entanglements that we have. Does that make sense? So
Absolutely.
It's senses. So what do I hear? Where is it? Is there like a heaviness somewhere? Is there a tightness somewhere? Is there an ache? What color is it? Let's literally focus on the senses. Like I was telling you when we started this podcast, I was telling you about my back strain. I could write a big, awful story about that. Oh, I'm getting so old. Oh my gosh, how long is it going to be until I can train again? I'm going to lose all of my muscle. Like, or yeah, what I feel, Joe, is there's like this diffuse sort of, I don't know, it's kind of like a cobweb across my lower back. That's so different. That's sensation versus big, long story that isn't necessarily true. And then, of course, as you move up into the mind, it's, you know what? I could just literally, and I did this when I was preparing for contests, Joe. I literally had a notebook. And at one point I just sat down and I was like, I'm going to write down all the thoughts that are coming into my head right now. And I'm sitting in the kitchen, really good spot, right? And I'm just picturing people right now who are competing, sitting in front of the television, watching the Food Network. People, if you want to help yourselves, try to create an environment in which you're not perpetuating the very thoughts you don't want to have. We're already food preoccupied. Don't perpetuate it. Am I making sense here?
Yeah, the one thing I'm thinking is, all of these things are the starting point for that process. And then ultimately, it's like, Jeff Stuckey and I talked about in this podcast we did on communication last time in terms of the Viktor Frankl quote, in that space, in that gap, there's, you have a thought, then you have a response. You have a thought, then you have a response, a thought, then a behavior. You got to wedge that. There's a tiny sliver of time right there that you can change the response. And you got to practice like getting your axe blade right in that spot and stopping the process. So you can say, okay, I had that thought. This is my normal behavior. Maybe I can do something different this time. And even in those moments of just rabid feelings of starvation and depletion and hypoglycemia, my blood sugar might have been 40 in those moments.
Absolutely.
You feel like I have to eat something now. It's just an evolutionary instinct. But if I could have had that skill to pause in that gap and say, okay, wait a second. I really just ate an hour and a half ago, but I did some cardio, so it may take a little time for my blood sugar levels to get back up, because to my benefit, my body's going to be converting body fats. And so maybe that's what I want instead of this feeding frenzy. And if you start to intellectualize it, if you do move it into your neocortex, that's where you can widen that gap that allows you more options for new behavior instead of falling off that same cliff every single time.
And from fiction to fact. And I'll say this though, we need the pause, we need the physiological pause to go from fiction to fact. So I even do this right now. When I sense that I'm getting a little keyed up, amped up, agitated, I will lay on the floor. I will get out of my chair and I will lay on the floor. And I will
my trick.
Do deep breathing. Because it's grounding. I can feel my body's weight on the ground. And then the breathing helps to activate the parasympathetic rest and relax part of the nervous system. Then I'm in that pause place to be able to see other perspectives, other opportunities, other choices. In those moments, Joe, and we're just like, bam, immediately into the binge, into the food, into the whatever, we yell at our partners, anything that is impulsive like that, even if there's a biological mechanism, what we're not seeing are the choices. We're not seeing that we have other choices, and we have other choices.
I think we need to maybe name and copyright this move, because without realizing why I was doing it, when I was dealing with some higher levels of anxiety, and you would walk by my office and you would see me laying on the floor,
Mm-hmm.
it was literally the only way at times I could just metaphorically, but also physically,
Mm-hmm.
just make myself stop. Because if I made myself lay on my back, I couldn't act. I couldn't reach for something to do a phone call or an email or anything else. I couldn't, I could only lay there and deal with the thoughts I was having.
Mm-hmm.
And it, like you said, I mean, there's a nature of grounding to it, but it also is just intentional paralysis and quieting down.
Mm-hmm.
And it gives you that time to really wedge into that gap.
That's so right. Joe, when I was competing, I can't tell you how many times just the act of go sit down, go lay on the couch was helpful to me when I was just ready to bolt into the kitchen. Lay down, close your eyes and breathe.
Perfect. We got to stop there. That's the one thing that people need to do to start that process. That was my whole, the point I wanted to get to is that this is a line of dominoes, and you gotta take that one out before they all fall.
Mm-hmm.
You gotta, that's that metaphorical gap.
Yeah, you break the sequence. Mm-hmm.
Kori, as always, I think this is just going to be something that a lot of people need. So anybody watching, listening, if you made it through all 32 minutes,
Mm-hmm.
please share this with people that you think could benefit with some work on eating behavior, anxiety in general. And we will see you next time in the Life Mastery Podcast.
Thanks, guys.